Hi, I'm Brent Barton, and today I have Dan Greening. Hi, Dan.
Hey, man.
Hey. You just finished an interesting topic on agile leadership and patterns, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
With Jeff Sutherland.
And that went well?
Yeah, it went really well.
I'm passionate about agile leadership because as
yeah.
we get into a bigger, more complex environments, it's just becoming more and more evident that they're critical to our success.
Right,
so
right.
Tell us more about your perspective on that.
Well, one of the things that I discovered, and you've probably discovered this too, is that we think of Agile, at least initially, we thought of it as an engineering problem. That, okay, it takes a long time for us to do this, the projects sometimes fail, they over budget and they're over time.
Yes.
And so we started out trying to fix engineering, and we did largely, right? Like we have Scrum and Kanban and XP and all these other great things. But then, first of all, it's hard to do.
Yes.
And so we hire a bunch of coaches to do that, and then it costs a lot of money. And then I started seeing large companies hiring massive numbers of coaches, an army of coaches at millions of dollars per year in cost.
Yes.
They would hire them, they would convert the engineering department. Someone, in the finance department would go, wow, this is really expensive. Do we have to keep these people around? And someone says, oh yeah, we're agile already. We don't need them anymore. We are converted. And then the coaches would go away.
Yes.
And guess what? Agile would revert.
Yes.
We would get this situation where the teams wouldn't have this high level agile thinking anymore, and away the agile would go. And then they would go, oh my God, our release times have gone from 1 month to 6 months,
yes.
9 months, 12 months. We got to do something.
Yeah.
So 2 years later, after they fired all the coaches, they go, we better do something. And someone says, well, that was Scrum, and now we ought to use Kanban, right? Like, so they hire a bunch of Kanban people, and then I saw one recently where they go, oh yeah, that was Scrum, and then we did Kanban, and now we should use something different called Lean Startup. That's the thing. And I'm going like, that is hilarious,
yes.
right? Because Lean Startup is an agile method, but it's not a replacement for Scrum or Kanban. It's actually dealing with market side stuff, product management. And so it can be used really effectively together. And I'm going, and then you just look at these peaks and valleys of hired coaches. I'm going, what's the issue here? So Jeff Sutherland and I were hanging out, and I've been complaining to Jeff for the last, 5 years about this.
Yes.
And he said, I think one of the things is, who are the leaders? And he and I started comparing notes, and we're going, oh my God, is the leader agile themselves? Do they run their company in an agile way? Do they think about their work in an agile way? And when we saw that agility was retained. And oftentimes they can, create agility themselves and maintain it themselves. And then what we would also see is this pattern, like a leader might get fired or leave or whatever, and then agility would disappear.
So what does it mean to be an agile leader in the context you just described?
That was my first cut. I said, okay, I want to tackle that, because I've been dealing with big companies. I've been working with Skype and Citrix and other companies like that. So I said, what is it about this? And then I realized I didn't really have a good definition for agility, right? I can go to the Agile Manifesto, and it's got some guidance for software developers. I mean, if you read it, it's all about software. I'm going, I think finance people, marketing people, everybody can be agile if it suits their economic needs, and usually does. So I said, before I even tackle leaders and enterprises, I got to figure out what agility is and what it's defined by. So I looked at all of our agile practices and what purposes they serve in what I think of as chaotic economies. So production is a chaotic economy, and Scrum works really well for that. Market product management is a chaotic economy, and Lean Startup works really well for that. So what's going on there? It's all about sensing, adapting, and creating new things for an economy, and doing it fast enough that you can adapt to the changes that might occur during it, that thing. So I came up with 5 patterns, and they're actually really simple. So the first thing is you have to measure some leading indicator about your economy. In Scrum, it's about production. So we have to produce something, and so the big indicators are cost. And so a leading indicator of cost is velocity. That's a primary metric.
Right.
If you just use velocity, though, it gets a little perverse, right? Because you start doing high velocity and then you produce crap. So we have to have something else to balance that off, to make it not so perverse. So we use defect rate. And then you have both of those, and then you go, well, we want our people to be happy, because when they're happy, they produce more creative output. We add happiness. So there are 3 metrics that lots of people like to use, Jeff and I especially: velocity, happiness, and defect rate. But that pattern, measuring leading indicator, is step number 1. If you don't know what your economy is, why are you doing it, and what are some leading indicators that you're making the right choices,
Yes.
you're doomed for Agile, right? You can't do it.
Yes.
So the second thing is you have to experiment. You have to adaptively experiment to improve. And so when you do that, you're looking at your metrics, and then you're trying new things.
Right.
Like our retrospectives, we try new definitions of done, definitions of ready. We see, does it improve things or not improve things? We get, today, most retrospectives are pretty lame, I have to admit, right? Like a lot of people like phone it in. Yeah, that's the centerpiece of Scrum, really,
of
right?
Course.
Like if you're really doing a good retrospective, you'll see this acceleration and velocity.
Yes.
If you're phoning in your retrospective, you might be better than waterfall, but not by much.
Yeah.
So that's the experimentation side. And then the third thing, and these 3 things give you agility, the third thing is limiting work in process. So yeah, you can measure stuff, you can experiment, but if the length of time or the amount of work you have to do to actually run those experiments is too big, you're going to be a lot slower than the chaotic economy that you live in. So if you limit the work in process, you're going to be fast enough, and then you're doing all the right things. And my assertion is, if you do those 3 things, you are Agile. So the problem is, doing those 3 things is really hard.
That's true.
Like you're measuring stuff, and guess what? You're starting to tell the truth, and people are getting embarrassed, and guess what? They really wish you weren't doing that. So then you're experimenting,
Right.
and guess what? Sometimes you fail, and sometimes people are uncomfortable about that, and that uncomfortableness it's another pressure to stop doing Agile. You're limiting work in process, and then people are saying around you, oh my God, my project is so important, can't you do a little bit on my project,
fit
right?
that in?
Yeah.
It's not that big.
So there's pressure everywhere to be not Agile. And so those 3 things are hard, and so I realized that we do things in Agile to reinforce it a little bit. And one of those things we do is we embrace collective responsibility. So here's what I mean by that. When you join a team, you could join a team and say, I'm a developer, and another person could join the team and say, I'm a tester. Then you start doing your thing, and then the developer gets done, the testing doesn't get done, you get to the end of the sprint, it doesn't ship, someone says, here's a failure, we couldn't ship it, and you go to the developer and say, what went wrong? The developer blames somebody else.
Right.
The developer says, not my problem, I'm a developer, it's the tester that did it. And the problem though is that as your project matures, testing becomes more and more of a dominant factor.
Right.
So we didn't shift, this developer didn't shift their responsibility over to deal with that. They just said, my job is this. So collective responsibility says, I join this team and I agree, I write a contract by joining this team, I will be personally responsible for the collective output of the team. So it puts enormous pressure on individuals to really make up for, deficiencies in the team. But the result is higher agility, right? Now people are adapting with the flow of work that's coming into the team to deliver value. So that 4th thing provides enormous stability for Agile teams. And we see that in training, right? Like XP, it's all about together as a team. Collective code ownership is another sub-pattern of that. Pretty interesting. And then the last pattern is you're often working in a system that is limiting your agility. So here I am on a team, and I depend on stuff from other teams, let's say.
Right.
And they are slow, right? And I'm going, okay, I'm agile. I can just, ship. But I keep depending on this stuff from this other group that's doing 2-month sprints, right? It takes them 2 months to actually give me something releasable. So that pattern is solves systemic problems. So now what's happening is instead of looking at my little team, I start looking around my team and say, what's going on in the system around me that is limiting my agility? And it turns out there's all these teams that I depend on. And so what happens is that encourages people to go out and reach out to those teams and help them. So famously, Toyota did this when it was doing just-in-time manufacturing.
Right.
It was trying to build these cars. Someone makes an order and then you start doing all the stuff to build the car. Well, they would get all the way down to the tires and then would go like, we don't build tires, we buy those. So went out to the tire manufacturer and said, hey, could you make some tires for me? I just got an order.
Right.
And the tire manufacturer goes, you should have, we do this on a quarterly cycle. We sent you the memo. You didn't read it. Like, you're supposed to pre-order however many tires you need for the cars you're going to build. Oh, and then you go, okay, well, that means I could. They say, well, how many cars are you going to build? And Toyota goes, we're just in time. We don't know. So they said, they finally, got frustrated and they said, well, I guess we could be a tire manufacturer, but we're not, great at that. Here's the next best thing. We'll go out and teach the tire manufacturer how to do just in time. And that's exactly what they did. And by doing that, they actually created kind of an infrastructure of just in time in Japan, right? And we started seeing Honda and other car manufacturers start to adopt this strategy because they could. Their tire manufacturers were agile and they were sitting there like, sitting on their butts really. Right. And then they said, oh, well, we can do that. We've got all these great service providers. So those 5 things.
Great.
So measuring economic progress, so leading indicators, adaptively experimenting for improvement, limit work in process, and now you are agile. But you won't be able to keep it unless you do a couple more things. And the couple more things are embracing collective responsibility, creating a culture where individual people feel responsible, and finally, solving systemic problems. And that gets us back to leadership, right? So now I'm going, okay, this is great. I got a definition of agility. I've got these patterns. And guess what? They're totally scalable. I can go to an individual and I can say, hey, Brent, I can tell whether you're agile by just interviewing you and asking you some questions about how you run your life.
Right.
Or I could go to you as a team, or I could go to you as an executive and say, hey, let's find out if your organization is agile or not.
Excellent.
What are you measuring? What are you experimenting on? What's your progress limit, work in progress? And this is important. It's more important. It's important at so many scales. One is, as an executive, do you have a little team of people dealing with strategic work?
Right.
I call them strategic scrum teams, where you've got a bunch of VPs or directors in a room, and you've got strategic work in a backlog, and you're actually plowing through it and solving major problems for companies. Another thing you can do is, like, you're hiring someone for a position in a company that is agile, and I'm going, you know what? You shouldn't be hiring someone who answers those 5 questions in a funny way. That's how you tell they're agile, not that they wrote on their resume that I am agile or I know Scrum or whatever it is. I'm a CSM and I was a CEO at such a thing. It means nothing, right?
That's great.
Let's find out the reality behind the system.
Sounds like these are a consumable set of patterns for leaders to really evaluate and participate in the agility in the organization.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
great.
It's
That's
really
great.
fun.
Love to probe further about the finance groups and all of these other things and see how those teams are. We must do this again.
All right.
All right.
Great to talk to
chatting
you,
with
Brian.
you. Thanks, Dan.